Roll call, do I? Roll call?
Should. Bike out there, Jimmy.
What's that?
Didn't see a bike out there.
You almost did, my bike. Ready? We're live. All right, everybody, I'd like to welcome everyone here to the work session of the mayor and the city council on at 7 p.m. Time is currently 7:01 on July 27th, 2020. For meeting, the work session to discuss the Green Ainella Patron Single Concept Plan. In the absence of Council President David Glenn, I, Jim Ringsocker, will be acting Council President. I'd like to take a roll call. Councilwoman Boyer.
Here.
Councilman Robertson.
Here?
Councilman Martin.
Here.
Councilwoman Zinner.
Here.
And didn't miss anybody. The mayor's here. All right. Before we start, I did prepare a statement. I'd like to read it just to set some ground rules. I did have one edit to it, and I also have an edit to the agenda. For the agenda, under number 3, the agenda is available out in the foyer. Under 3, we're going to add B to discuss access. And that'll be discussed as concerns raised at the last council meeting. So for the statement, the public work session to discuss a single concept plan for the Green, Ainello, and Patron properties on Monday, 7/27/20 is for the council and city staff only. While the meeting is public under the Open Meetings Act, no additional submissions will be accepted, nor will any member of the audience be allowed to speak unless called upon. All questions to the audience members in attendance must be direct, and any response should be brief and address only the questions asked. Question before the council is, does the single concept plan as submitted meet all the requirements of AR 277? Does it have the required open space, not less than a quarter of the property? Is the remaining balance of the property distributed between residential and business use? Is there a public park 5 acres in size? Is there an extension of the lower Susquehanna Greenway Trail? Does the road network connect to Scenic Manor? Other items to be discussed: recoupment agreement on infrastructure, open space requirements, and then I'm adding access on here. The single concept plan was submitted by Mr. Ainello on behalf of the three respective property owners. It wasn't signed. The parties agreed they would not sign until the city council approved. The single concept plan is nothing more than a shell moving forward. The associated details should follow in future public works agreements and site plans. So with that, everybody please refer to the agenda. We're going to please start with the purpose of the single concept plan under AR 277 compared to the site plan. I'm going to offer the floor to Mr. Shane Grimm, Director of the Planning.
Thank you, Councilman Ringsocker. The purpose of the single concept plan under AR 277 was that the parties would come together to present a plan to the city that showed the proposed development of their properties conceptually. It does not show any different lots, whether they be townhouse lots, single-family lots, anything like that. It does not show that level of detail. A concept plan generally in the city is always required whenever public roads are being proposed. So a concept plan would have to come in front of the mayor and city council for any plan showing public roads. So this is very conceptual in nature and shows the general distribution of land uses and the roads. And those land uses and roads were discussed with the Department of Planning and Administration over many months earlier in this year. And that we agreed that from the department's perspective and the administration's perspective, that this was a plan that we could support moving forward in front of the mayor and city council. And that is the plan that you see in front of you currently, which was submitted to the mayor and city council to the Department of Planning for review first in March. A site plan would have much more detail, be much more fleshed out, and would require approval through the Board of Appeals and/or Planning Commission, dependent upon the type of development that is proposed and whether it is a permitted use, a conditional use, or a special exception. So I'll just end that segment by saying the concept plan was submitted in accordance with AR 277, and I believe it meets the requirements stipulated under that annexation resolution.
Okay. Could we discuss under number 2, the other mandatory elements captured in the submitted plan?
Sure. The concept plan lists 12 elements, and what is shown on the concept plan is what is in AR 277, but it's been condensed somewhat for brevity and clarity. Condition number 1 speaks to the zoning designations that are shown on the annexation resolution site plan, and that a concept plan must be submitted to the mayor and city council. Obviously, that's why we're here today. We have the concept plan in front of us. Number 2, the single concept plan shall show proposed uses. They have shown multifamily residential uses, other residential uses, open space, park areas, Maryland Environmental Trust easement areas. So it shows all of the proposed use and commercial uses on a portion of the property. Number 4, the remaining balance of the property must be distributed between residential uses and business uses, with no more than 2/3 of the remaining balance devoted to either one use. The parties acknowledge that this can happen one of two ways. That balance can either be divided amongst the properties, or one property owner can establish that they want to take that certain ratio or that ratio of business. On the property, there shall be dedicated a city park 5 acres in size. That is shown on the plan, it's centrally located, shown on this plan. The public area may be used to partially satisfy the requirements that 1/4 of the property be used for open space. That has been demonstrated on the plan. Number 7 speaks to the lower Susquehanna Heritage Greenway Trail that was required to be shown on the plan. It's a 6-foot wide paved trail that is shown on the plan. However, I will note that during detailed design, the location, the actual location of that trail may change, and we understand that. The road network across the property must reflect a public road connection into scenic manner. That is shown on the plan as required by the annexation resolution. Any site plan submitted must be consistent with the approved concept plan that's noted, and certainly that would be one of the first orders of business in my review, to make sure that the site plans were in accordance with the approved concept plan. Proposed uses with not less than 1/4 of the property used for open space and the remaining balance of the property distributed between residential uses and business uses, with no more than 2/3 of the remaining balance. We've already spoken to that. The Petrone property shall retain the right to access Chapel Road until such time an alternative public road access is provided. As noted in my staff report, there was an option for Ms. Petrone to acquire one of the lots in Scenic Manor that would have allowed access to Scenic Manor Drive. It is my understanding that she did not access that, or she did not act on that. So that right is no longer available to the Petrone property. The INLO development shall retain the right to access Route 155, utilizing their existing 50-foot easement until such time an alternative public road access is provided through the Green property. That is shown on the plan, and we understand and acknowledge that. And that's all I have at this time on the mandatory elements being they were captured in the plan and shown on the plan, and I believe that they meet the requirements of AR 277.
Council, any questions? Could you go into depth on the open space requirements? And
Sure.
what's currently listed on here?
Sure. So as I noted earlier, there is the requirement for a 5-acre public park to be dedicated to the city. That park is shown as centrally located on this plan. It meets the requirement and intent of AR 277. And then there are other open space requirements that roughly result in a total of 61 acres of open space that will be required for the overall development. While they have not demonstrated on the plan they can meet all 61 acres, it is implied because any development is going to have a certain amount of open space. They're very close on here. I have no doubt they will meet those open space. Quite frankly, they will exceed the open space requirements when the development is shown on a site plan or site plans. So I have no reason to believe that they will not meet that 61-acre requirement.
So the requirement for the open space is for the entire plan, not per developer?
That's correct.
Okay.
And as noted in the staff report, with a letter from the city attorney, the 50-acre Maryland Environmental Trust easement can be included in those open space calculations. So that'll be the bulk of the open space.
Very good. Council, any questions?
I know we haven't really gone over this yet, but the roads A, B, C, D, and E, those will be public access roads, right? They're not private roads, they're city-owned roads?
That's correct, Councilman Robertson. They will be designed and constructed to Harford County Road Code standards, and then upon completion and inspection by the city, they will be dedicated to the city and become part of the city road network.
And will the city incur any costs for the development of those roads?
There shouldn't be any costs incurred by the city. That will be borne by the developers.
Okay, just in the maintenance thereafter they're built?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? All right, thank you so much. All right, next, moving on to number 3, I'm going to give the floor to Ms. April Ishak for concerns raised at our last council meeting.
Okay, council members, you were all at the last council meeting, and when the presentation was made by Mr. Grimm based on the staff report and his review of the single concept plan, it was slightly before that presentation was already scheduled to come before council that one of the parties raised some concerns, and they were raised at that council meeting. The concerns were pretty much outlined on one of the slides from the presentation. I'm going to go through them briefly just to reiterate what those concerns were, and then I'll take questions and any concerns you might have with respect to those. The first one raised was density. That in the staff report, Mr. Grimm recommended, conditioned the approval of the single concept plan on the idea that there would be 150 lot density project on the Ionello parcel. That was in the staff report. It was not part of the original concept plan as submitted, but it was based on his review of the project in light of the other densities in the area. Mr. Ionello has requested that that density mentioned in the staff report be removed and not be part of the single concept plan. And so that's something that the city council can consider. I understand from Mr. Grimm that placing the density designation in the staff report or the single concept plan is not a requirement at this stage. However, that being said, it doesn't change the fact that the project would still need to go through the regular process, and at that point, the density will be determined at a later date. So the city, neither the city nor the parties would be subject to any density representation at this time. It'll just be left open-ended until further process. The next item concern raised was the park, particularly was the timing of the park and whether or not it would be developed earlier rather than later in the process. Mr. Ionello had suggested that there be some kind of requirement that a UNO permit would not be issued. That the park would be constructed at the time the 250th unit were constructed. That the park would have to be built within that time frame, at least started. So that is a concern, obviously, for some of the people who move into the community early, and if the second part of the development doesn't get started for a while, there could be a situation where you have homes built and then the park space is not accessible. So that's something that the council may consider. I do not believe that was addressed specifically in the staff report. I don't think it's something that could be precluded from being added. It's just a consideration. And the other consideration internally, some of us questioned whether or not the park could be moved somewhere else on the parcels. That would be subject to the council's discussion or the parties' agreement voluntarily moving the park. I'm not sure how that would end up, but that's just an option you can consider. The other thing about the park too, if we don't look at just at how many permits or how many units are constructed in terms of the timing of the park, but we could actually consider the timing of it in terms of number of years and then have it bonded at the time a public works agreement is entered, have that bonded item, that if the park isn't built within the 250th unit being constructed or within so many years, then we can call the bond and construct it with the bond funds. So that would be another option and how to deal with that issue. And in terms of access, there was concerns raised that if Road D is limited to right in, right out, which is a preference of the city, although I have to say that will be subject ultimately to the State Highway Administration decision. We would be subject to whatever they say. Mount Felix is concerned that having right in, right out would limit their primary access. Then one of the options, looking at the draft concept plan, is that the top part of Road C from Bully Rock Parkway over to Road D could be independently constructed as a possibility by the developer of Mount Felix as an option for additional access. And that road's already shown on the single concept plan, so that wouldn't even require an amendment. It would just be an added condition to the parties. And then the other one was the temporary utility easements. It was raised as a concern, but quite frankly, the utility easements are shown between Scenic Manor and the Green Ionello parcels in a kind of a shaded area. So those are going to be constructed according to the city's standards, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Grimm, if there is a determination of the size of the facilities needed to construct both the Green and the Ionello parcels and the Patron parcels, that the city's going to dictate the size of those facilities, and the facilities that go in there are not going to preclude access from anybody from developing their pieces. Is my understanding correct on that?
That's correct.
And also, by entering this single concept plan, Mr. Grimm, if you can correct me if I'm wrong, the parties are agreeing to this layout of the road. So if one party is ready to build a road or the utilities, they're ready to move forward, under this single concept plan, they'd be entitled to do that. Is that correct?
They'd be entitled to construct the road that they have rights to access the road. So for example, just hypothetically, if Mr. Ionello was prepared to move forward, and in order for him to move forward, he needed to construct Road D, he could do that, provided that the Greens would allow that to occur in order for him to be able to have access to his property.
And by signing the single concept plan, I mean, it'd be my position as city attorney that if you're signing this single concept plan, you're going to allow access because you're agreeing to this road concept. Is that fair?
I would concur.
Okay. So one of the things the council can consider, if it's not clear from the single concept plan, the way it currently sits, we could perhaps add some conditional language to make that clear that access is expected from either side. Whoever's first ready to build gets to start, if you will.
If I may add one thing just for clarification, in the staff report, the way we had it worded under the condition number 8 was that the park must be available for public use and dedicated to the city upon construction and opening of Road C to public use. Now, I understand the concerns there and the need for a change to that condition. If the council desires to do that, I do want to clarify when we talk about construction of the park, the AR 277 only required a passive park akin to tidings. So construction is, I don't know if it's necessarily the right word, we have asked for the park to be graded in such a manner that can be used, but there is nothing shown on this plan and no requirement under AR 277 for any type of specific use like a ball field or any type of parking lot. Certainly, if the developers of the property so desired to do those amenities, I'm sure that we would appreciate that, but there is no requirement other than to provide the actual area for the park.
Okay, and then I think too, it could also clarify if Road C needs to be constructed, we can designate which portion of Road C.
Yes, we could do that.
Okay. And let's see if I had anything else. That's all I had right now. Oh, the one other thing too, there was a concern, it wasn't on the bullet point necessarily, but I think underlying this, there was concern that there was a development agreement that was being negotiated. The terms of the development agreement is not something that involves the city, but typically in the process, in this case, because council is being asked to approve the single concept plan, what would typically happen is once and Mr. Shane can speak more directly to this, once this concept plan is approved and moves forward, then the parties can each move forward along the process, and then in that process, there will be public works agreements and with subject rights to recoupment that eventually can be negotiated by the parties, but we can't even begin to nobody can really begin to negotiate some of that when you don't know the costs involved in the construction. So it's almost like putting the cart before the horse. So if you can explain maybe the process a little bit after once concept plan gets approved, Mr. Grimm, I think now would be a good time to explain the process, what would happen after that.
Sure. I can go through what I provided the council as far as that.
That would be fine.
Okay. I provided a brief flow chart for council, and there are two tracks, one for the Green property and one for the INL property. And the only reason that there are two tracks is because of the type of project that Mr. Iannello has indicated to the city that he'd like to develop, which may require different reviews and approvals. So I'll start with the Green property first. Assuming approval of the concept plan, the next step would be for the Green family and their selected developer to submit a forest stand delineation and a traffic impact analysis, and those would be required to be approved prior to the submission of a subdivision plan for review by the Planning Commission. That's typical process. You can't accept a site plan until you have a forest stand delineation that's been approved. The traffic impact analysis will also be reviewed by the city, State Highway Administration, likely the county as well will give us comments, and then we will come up with the appropriate mitigation. The developer's report will suggest certain mitigation, and we will either agree with that or negotiate, which is typical, to come to improvements that meet the requirements of the APF, which we do not have APF in place now, but we do have code provisions in the city code that allow us to ask for a traffic impact study. After they've completed that initial step, they will be preparing their subdivision plan for submission to the Planning Commission for review and approval. Following that, assuming Planning Commission approval of the subdivision plan, then the developer will be preparing their construction documents such as stormwater management plans, grading plans, utility plans, and road plans for review by the Department of Public Works. Also at that time, the developer will be preparing final plats for recordation in the Harford County Land Records. After the DPW approval of the construction documents, the developer will begin mass grading and construction of roads and utilities. Also, that I should note that's after sediment and erosion control plans have been approved and a grading permit issue. After that, then building permit applications for individual lots can be submitted to the city for review and approval, and then construction of those residential dwellings can commence. Moving over to the Iannello property, the first step would be to submit ordinances to the city, either through Mr. Iannello's attorney in collaboration with the department, or the department can begin drafting documents to allow and gives specific criteria for housing for the elderly and assisted living. And then that would come to the mayor and city council to consider and potentially adopt those ordinances. Also, at the same time, my arrows should have been a little bit different here. Mr. Iannello will then also be preparing a forest stand delineation and traffic impact analysis for his project as well. So we'll have two separate studies and forest stand delineations. After the mayor and city council approve those ordinances, then Mr. Iannello can proceed forward with the Board of Appeals first for reviews of conditional uses for housing for the elderly and assisted living facilities. I should note that those are not specific permitted uses or conditional uses in the city code at this time. So it is my opinion at this time that those would be conditional uses. And conditional uses require that higher level of scrutiny and review by the Board of Appeals. Once the Board of Appeals approves those conditional uses, then it would be forwarded to the Planning Commission for review of the subdivision plan and/or site plan. At this time, there is no assumption that Mr. Iannello will subdivide his property. Certainly he can if he wants to subdivide out certain components of the development, that is certainly fine. But more than likely, Mr. Iannello's project will be what I consider a site plan. The site plan will then go through the same process from there on out as Mr. Green's project, where it'll go through the Planning Commission, get reviewed and approved. The developer will be preparing all of the construction documents and plans for review by DPW. Again, if subdivision occurs, final plats will be recorded. I will require, as part of any review of Mr. Iannello's, regardless of subdivision, that a final plat be recorded because it will be necessary to record any appropriate easements, utility and drainage and utility easements across that property. So we'll at a minimum require a plat to be recorded in the land record showing those easements. And again, that'll move forward to DPW approval of construction documents, grading permits, then moving on to mass grading, construction of roads and utilities, and then ultimately building permit applications for the structures proposed on Mr. Iannello's property. And that concludes the brief flow chart, and I'd happy to be for council to just change those hours a little bit to make it a little bit more clear.
Council, any questions on the flow chart? Do you have any other specific questions for Mr. Grimm?
Jimmy,
Yes, sir.
when we're working with this process, DPW is going to
Move the microphone down a little. Thank you.
DPW is going to be reviewing the wastewater management as well, so that we're talking about the DNR requirements and the environmental requirements in this process.
Yes, just to clarify, so there's going to be stormwater review and wastewater review. So wastewater review, I think of effluent from a project. So they will definitely have both reviews. Mr. Whitty will be reviewing those projects, as we've indicated to the developers in the past. Should there be a significant level of work in front of Mr. Whitty, we may need to rely on outside consultants to review those plans, but they will have to meet the minimum requirements of the city codes that are concerning stormwater and effluent.
Okay, so that's all going to be after DPW approval of construction. All that stormwater management, wastewater management will all be in there.
Right, it'll come right after Planning Commission. In a typical process, the developer does not have fully engineered plans at the time of their site plan. They have a good idea where their utilities are going to go and what size water and sewer may be. But until they have that approval, they typically don't then move into final engineering. They want to know that they have that approval before they spend any more money on engineering documents. So they hit the ground running after they get their approval. And it's totally on them, the time frame as to how long it takes them to get those plans turned around to the city for review and approval.
Thank you.
All right.
Councilmember Ringsager?
Yes, sir.
I may just ask the attorney a few things based on
Please.
her comments. So I'm really glad that you
Technically, I
clarified
agree.
the density in the park a little bit. Hopefully, if we can address those concerns then all parties would agree to the plan. As far as density is concerned, I like the idea of taking that requirement out of the single concept plan. I mean, to me, and anybody at this table, correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, density makes sense when you're talking about a development plan later down the line, right?
Site plan. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so I'm fine with that. And as far as the park is concerned, the city wouldn't be holding any building up for the park, right? It's between the developers for whatever they plan to do to get that park up?
Well, we could be holding up it's really the dedication of the park and getting it graded and accessible to the public, in the sense that if we were to impose a condition that required it to be built by a certain time, then we would be holding up a developer, because similar to the Bully Rock scenario with the Zachman Way issue, where once they hit a certain threshold, you got to build it or we don't issue any more permit, kind of thing. It could be something like that, or it could be, in that case, we ended up accepting a bond in lieu of the construction. So we could actually impose a bond requirement here in lieu of that as a backup. But that would at least get the park built. Now, the only concern there is if Road C isn't built, then arguably you wouldn't be able to access the park. But we could also, based on this plan, if the park were to stay as is in its current location, it would be accessible by Road D presumably. So we can maybe alter the condition there and say it's got to be built by X number of units, X number of time, with a backup bond. And it could, if that's the case, if Road C isn't built yet, then we can access it by Road D or something like that.
Okay, I guess to clarify my question a little more, so it is the developers that would create the park, not the city, correct?
Yeah, they would be grading it. They're not going to be, it's not going to be a built-out park like, some people were.
Green space.
Yeah, green space, basically. Anything after that, once it's dedicated, the city can add whatever they want to it. But yeah, it would just be green space initially.
I don't really see too much of an issue with having a timeline on that. I would probably prefer that in, a time frame versus number of units, mainly because, again, we don't have site plans yet. But I could see why that would be a concern for some of the other potential developers in the area, because you definitely want to have, a nice little showy area, a nice little green spaces, places start to become developed. And we've seen in Bully Rock how it can take over a decade's time for everything to get squared away. So I like both of those proposals, April. And have you had a chance to talk to the parties involved with those proposals yet?
Not with that specific proposal. I did discuss whether the park issue was flexible in terms of where it could be located or things like that. And I didn't seem to get too much concern. So the access issue and having it timed might be agreeable. So we could discuss that with the parties at any time.
Okay.
So could we do that after the approval, or does that need to be discussed?
It's up to you. You can do it before the approval or after.
Should that be part of the resolution?
It can be.
Can we amend the approval at any time?
You can amend what's been presented. You can amend that. You can request amendments be made.
Well, I mean,
mean,
after, if we were to accept a resolution next week, and something came in that I don't know, as a council, we're like, oh, we probably should have said Road D is a condition versus C or whatever.
Well, there's two ways to do it. One, you can amend the staff report, or you can do it as a condition in the resolution itself.
Okay.
Mr. Grimm?
If I may, Ms. Ishak, in talking about the park and some of the issues surrounding timing, I think you made the comment about bonding and we could bond. To me, that seems like it may be just a little problematic, because we can bond it and say that we'll pull the bond if they don't meet the requirements, but we won't own it. They won't have been dedicated. So is there a merit to saying that we should have that dedicated upfront more?
Yeah.
To ensure that we have it?
Yeah, and in the bonding, I was thinking more in a PWA type agreement, not like now having it bonded, obviously, but Yeah, I mean, we could say if it doesn't meet a certain threshold, then it gets immediately dedicated to the city with whatever PWA bonding we could get to do the grading, whatever is needed to get it attached to Road D, I guess, or to
Right.
get it accessible from Road D.
And just, if I may, just to clarify for Councilman Robertson, the condition in the staff report also speaks to the timing of the removal of the agricultural structures on that property as well. So the developer, that would be on them to make sure that those are removed, and also stated in here, there's a requirement they should do a Phase 1 environmental assessment, because certainly the city of Havertide Grace doesn't want to take over a site that, may have some contamination.
Super fun.
Super fun site. Yeah.
Roger that, man. Thank you.
Sure.
Very treasure.
Grim, the location, since this is not a site plan, but really a proposal, they could rotate that park or change it, correct?
Yes, it's my opinion that, and I will defer to Mrs. Shack on this, but I believe that minor revisions to the plan can be done administratively. So for example, we know that these roads won't, assuming that this project gets completed, you will never be able to lay this concept plan over in the future and have it match completely, because there hasn't been engineering done. So we understand that these roads may shift, the park may be tweaked a little bit. So those types of things, I believe that I have the administrative capability to say that these can be approved. They don't need to go in front of council. Certainly, if something came in that was a substantive change, I would review that with Mrs. Shack and the administration to determine whether or not it would be appropriate to bring that plan before the mayor and city council. But I do believe that we can administratively make tweaks to the plan.
Thank you, sir.
Ms. Etchak, if I could just gain clarification on the previous conversation about the recruitment and about building up the roads. Was it determined that if Mr. Ianello wanted to build out Road D, he would have access to do that, but not Road C? Or it's under your legal opinion he does have, because it's agreed upon?
Well, in order to have access, we would really need access from the property owners, and the idea would be that this concept plan grants at least a semblance of that agreement. Yes, these are where the roads are going to be. Yes, if you need to engineer, you can have permission to come onto my property to do your engineering and construct the roads. And in this case, the road system goes across the green property, because the Ianello project, the project, at least in its initial concept, doesn't even have any public roads. So all of the public roads are going through the green property, which does pose a problem of access. So right now, the Ianello property has an easement over Road D. I would expect that if the parties are signing this or agreeing to this single concept plan, it's approved by city council, that Road D, that Mr. Ianello would be able to proceed with developing Road D as part of his plan without any objection from the Greens, because they're agreeing that a road can go there.
And he already has a 50-foot wide easement there.
Correct, there's already an easement there. And so then the concern comes beside Road C, and our original thought was that this development would have access to Bully Rock Parkway, and it seems that since the upper portion of roads, I call it the upper portion, but Road C, that's closest to Level Road, and it intersects at Bully Rock Parkway.
C1 and C2.
Yes, we're calling it C2.
Yeah.
So C2, if you look at it, that would make the most sense to construct that, even if it was an initial road and maybe not built out to full standards, but just basic county road code standards without the big circle there. We may not need that yet. But my point is that at least that access should be allowed, especially if if Road D ends up being right in, right out. So, is a possibility with the parties' agreement that that might be accessible as a backup plan, if you will, if the Ianello project were to proceed forward and the Green project not proceed forward, then at least Mr. Ianello would have an option to construct a secondary entrance.
All right, thanks so much. Questions, council, any other further questions under this? Sir?
Sorry for so many questions.
I apologize.
So am I to understand that Scenic Manor Drive is not going to attach to Road AB? Or it is?
So Scenic Manor Drive is going to connect right to Road A right there. It's going to come through.
All right, because I had heard something about another deal, but okay. Thank you.
I think I can clarify that for you. I think what you're referring to is, as you see right now, Road A on the plan connects to Bully Rock Parkway. And what we've said is that we would prefer to fix the three-way intersection at Bully Rock Parkway and Chapel Road, which, as you know, is a problematic intersection from an operational and safety perspective, so that should we be able to foster that connection through discussions with the developers and upon review of a traffic impact analysis to determine what the appropriate intersection would be there, we would not make a requirement for that connection of Road A to Bully Rock Parkway, because we'd be making a connection to create either a roundabout or a four-way stop intersection. I think that may have been what you heard.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Anything else?
I have a quick question. Mr. Grimm, when would you know that, though, if you were going to make that connection to Road A? At what point in the development plan would you know that? Or would Road A be a temporary road for access onto Bully Rock Parkway before you can determine if you're going to put that circle up either closer to on Chapel Road or further back on Bully Rock Parkway?
That would be determined long before we get to the site plan process. What I'll tell you is that the property is not owned by the city, that is adjacent. We've had some preliminary discussions with the property owner about potentially utilizing or acquiring that property. And that is my opinion, and I will defer to the administration on this, but that upon approval of the concept plan, that the administration will reach out and begin further conversations and deliberations over making that connection happen. However, what ultimately that intersection will be, like I said, whether a roundabout or a four-way stop-controlled intersection, that will be determined by a traffic impact analysis. So the actual, what the intersection will look like won't come till later, but we would like to pursue that connection to make that connection possible as soon as possible.
Anything else? All right. So number 4, can the concerns be addressed within the purposes of the submitted plan? I think we basically broached most of the subjects. I'd like to refer this to Shane on your thoughts on whether or not the concerns that we have from council that have been previously discussed would permit us to move forward with the plan.
Yes, Councilman Ringsacker, I believe that you could move forward with this plan and address the concerns with proposed amendments to the recommended conditions found within the staff report from the Department of Planning.
Ms. Ishak, can I ask your opinion?
Yeah, I think the big pieces are in place. I think there are just some minor tweaks that will address some of the concerns. Of the legal opinion that the development agreement is not part of AR 277 and therefore need not be considered by council. I think we've addressed the concerns that were raised by the parties prior to tonight. And Mr. Grimm, is, based on my conversations with him, was agreeable to some of the changes I discussed with him, that it would be within the context of the spirit and intent of AR 277 and the requirements on this plan.
Okay. Council, do you have any questions for the city attorney and the director of planning on that? All right. Next, moving on to the path forward. For that, I'd like to discuss where we go from here. I understand that we need the resolution, and my question is, do you believe that we'll be able to move on this at the next council meeting or the council meeting immediately following? Is there enough time within that time period to move with the resolution, to have one prepared?
Well, that would be next Monday, correct?
Yes.
All right.
I don't want to bog you down.
No, I'm just getting in my head where we're at.
He's just checking with the boss over here.
We would need to prepare any proposed amendments for that resolution. I think we could make that happen. I believe that the Department of Planning, Administration, and it sounds like the council is anxious to move forward with this, so I think we can accommodate that. I apologize for continually deferring to Ms. Ishak, but ultimately,
She's here for.
right, always defer to the attorney. ultimately, we would have to prepare those amendments and make sure they were legally sufficient with Ms. Ishak.
Yeah.
So I'll defer to her. Obviously, she has a very busy schedule as well as to whether or not that's doable for August 3rd.
Ms. Ajak?
Yeah, I would, once Mr. Grimm gets the revisions made, I'll have to take a look at them, and I believe that will be able to be done before next council meeting.
So it's probably more realistic for the 17th to have a resolution, just to have time for it to sit in the read file and,
If council would feel more comfortable having a little bit more time to read it, then that would be totally doable, too.
to mull it over and to have time to prepare.
And maybe even ask some more questions of either myself, Mr. Grimm, or, and give us time to discuss with the parties to make sure everybody's on board.
Council members, do you have any questions on this? Sir?
Councilman Ringsacher, with the 17th in mind, would it be all right to have a planning committee meeting between now and then, just to review
Absolutely.
the resolution together?
Absolutely.
All right, thank you.
I'll send that meeting out. I do ask that council members present, write down any questions they have. Don't send them to everybody, send them to myself, Ms. Ishak, and to Mr. Grimm, and we'll get them written out, properly formatted, and have them in the read file as the amendments, and try to get those out as soon as possible. I will convene the planning committee as soon as we can, try to go look at the schedule. I got to see what's going on, and we can have that maybe even Thursday or Tuesday next week, maybe, depending on your schedule. And then we could push forward with that. I see no problem with waiting until the 17th, just for prudence of prudence sake, to wait to make sure we do everything right. Council, any other further questions on on number 5? All right, moving on to number 6. Any general questions from council or staff members on this process? Any questions for the developers that are here? Any statements you'd like to make? All right, hearing none else, I'd like to thank everybody else for coming. I'd like to entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Being regularly moved and seconded by Councilman Robertson and Councilwoman Boyer. We are adjourned. Thank you.